Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley Brown. I'm your host and our Senior Marketing Manager at KLR. Today, we are teaming up with our affiliate Envision Technology Advisors for our October Cybersecurity Month webinar, What Nonprofit Board Members Need to Know About Cybersecurity. Today's webinar will explore essential cybersecurity best practices tailored specifically to empower nonprofit board members. I'll take a minute to introduce our presenters. Today we have Sandy Ross, partner and nonprofit practice group leader at KLR. Sandy has more than 20 years of nonprofit board consulting experience, and she performs management consulting on a variety of issues relative to the management of the modern nonprofit organization, including grant management, internal controls, internal financial reporting, and more. She has built a strong reputation for serving as a key advisor to nonprofit organizations in the New England area. Jay Longley is a senior consultant at Envision. He has more than 25 years of technology and cybersecurity experience and has established himself as a leader and trusted resource on topics such as zero trust, NIST, and regulatory compliance. He has been a frequent guest on local news segments and in-person speaking engagements and was a CEO for 14 years before joining Envision. His team has helped nonprofit organizations all over the world to recover from cybersecurity breaches and become more resilient in the process. Welcome to you both.
Good morning, Ashley. Thank you. Hi, Jay.
You're welcome.
Hey, Cindy, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
On the agenda today, Sandy and Jay will dive into top cyber risk areas for nonprofits, legal and regulatory requirements, board member liability, as well as providing some tips on how to stay safe. Your participation is a vital step towards safeguarding your organization's mission, impact, and sustainability in the digital age, so we will be answering any questions that have been submitted during registration and encourage you to please submit your questions during today's webinar using the GoToWebinar control panel question area. Just as a reminder, a link to a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar will be sent out via email after the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Sandy and Jay.
Thanks, Ashley. So good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for submitting some really great questions in advance. It really helps us kind of guide the conversation. As Ashley mentioned, Jay is here with me. Jay is an amazing resource to many organizations, and I've experienced the resources that he can provide to nonprofits, and it's been an amazing experience working with Jay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's see. So this morning, we're going to talk about cybersecurity. I think we'll start off with what it is and what it's not. Some of the most common threats, obviously to ourselves personally, but more specifically nonprofit organizations, the impact of cybersecurity and the lack thereof of security on nonprofits, some of the legal and regulatory requirements you should know, specifically what the risks are to boards, board members, and then potentially some grant opportunities that Jay's had some really good experience with in the past. We'll go over some key takeaways, how to stay safe, and as Ashley mentioned, we'll be monitoring the questions throughout. And as we go through, I'm sure there'll be questions that'll pop up that I'll ask Jay. So I also serve as a board member on several organizations, Jay as well. So we come to this from two different perspectives. And I think that really helps us kind of guide the conversation, because not only do we want to make sure that we're protecting our clients and serving the nonprofit organizations that serve our community, but we also want to understand from where we sit in our roles as volunteers on these organizations, how we're protecting ourselves. So, Jay, what is cybersecurity?
So you have the formal definition of cybersecurity here, but cybersecurity is a little bit different than what we're seeing, right? So it's not just something that you think about, it's a culture, right? That empowers an employee, that generates open conversations, that allows the community to come together to help protect an organization, right? So that's what you want cybersecurity to be. What you don't want it to be is a destructive culture, right? When recently we just had we had a seminar where an organization, if there was a phishing attack that was successful and somebody clicked on it, they would put a dunce hat on the person and parade them around the office, right? So that creates a culture where the employees are a bit nervous to report events, so we don't want that. So again, formal definition of cybersecurity is in front of you, but we want to have that culture where if events do occur, we want the organization to come together and work to secure it immediately.
I would be mortified if that happened. I think the one thing you want to do is create a culture of transparency. If you absolutely think that there's even a potential that something happened, you want to be able to report that right away. And in that kind of scenario, you would run really fast from that and potentially put the organization and yourselves at risk. So definitely a scary situation.
Right.
So slides are taking a little bit too advanced. So there we go. Moving. There we go. Okay. Oh, a little too fast. So obviously we're hearing about a lot of cybersecurity issues on the news, in social media and those types of things. But what are the most common areas that you've seen, Jay, that tell us some of the war stories.
Sure, absolutely. So ransomware attacks are in the news, and everybody's very well aware of them. So we left them off of this. When we talk about a little bit more about the phishing, because phishing is still a really easy way to get into an organization. And some of the ways that we've seen more prevalent lately is through resumes, right? So organizations have HR departments or accept resumes as a whole. Any threat actor can craft a resume, insert a payload into the resume, send it to HR or whoever the hiring party is, and that's how easy it is to get in. While you want to still look for the URL that's malformed or other things like that, I mean, a very common way to get in, is certainly through phishing, with the resumes with the payload. Insider threats, are a topic of conversation that are certainly becoming more and more elevated these days. Insider threats, somebody that you have within your organization itself that is disgruntled or is potentially paid by a threat actor or threat actor group to exploit the organization. I think there was a large news story about it fairly recently where an employee for SpaceX, I believe it was approached by a threat actor or ransomware group to help them launch an attack internal to the organization, right? So they reported it, thankfully, and whatnot. There are other areas too, beyond just cyber risk, that help threat actors get in, right? So you can attack an organization directly, but you also may be able to go through a third party, right? Board members right now are in particular risk because a lot of boards are doing very sensitive information and carrying a lot of conversations through their personal emails, their Gmails, their AOL accounts, and things like that don't necessarily fall under those security metrics and measures that the organization has put in for their employees. So there's a lot of different risk areas for organizations. That's, I would say, the more prevalent ones we're seeing these days.
I know I was at a conference last year, and there was an FBI agent that attended that said, here's a common one that most people fall for, especially in the professional realm. You have someone that looks like they're coming from your college, your alumni, and they say, we're having this amazing event, and we think based on your resume and you being an alumni of the organization, of the university, we'd love for you to present at our next alumni gathering. Please see attached and let us know if you're interested. And I think I would be susceptible for that type of thing, just because I want to help I want to help my alumni, all of those different things. And then not knowing, you mentioned payload. I'm assuming that's what's going to create some issues for the organization, whatever they're embedding in the attachment. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So whenever you open up an attachment or fake invoice or a questionnaire that could be in a Word document or a PDF, there's a bit of code in there that allows a threat actor to get into your system and maintain control of it. Once they're in your system, they can move east-west throughout the networks and throughout the organization, unless you have certain protocols and precautions put in place, right? But yeah, no, the war stories are real, and it's very easy to get into organizations now. Very easy to craft, code to get within the back end of a system at this point in time.
And you won't really necessarily know that that's happened. And how would you know if that's happened? It doesn't seem like that's going to be something that's going to be really obvious to someone like me who doesn't necessarily know what a payload is going to do.
Yeah, yep. So it's not very obvious, to your point, right? Unless you have certain precautions in place. There are metrics that you can have that monitor your system, that take those metrics and send it up to the cloud, and they know your behavioral habits, right? They know how you interact with your computer. They know the number of files that you touch on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. They know the way that you interact with the system, the locations you do it from, and all that. And if you start working in anomalous behavior, if things are being started that normally aren't started, it raises flags, and then those flags get escalated and says, is this really Sandy? She's looking at 300 files, today, and she normally looks at 50 in a given month, right? So there's a lot of correlation between the intelligence that's put in systems now and the connections to the cloud to help build a picture of you and are you working properly, right? So that's one way. The other way is too, where it's looking at the system and you open up a resume. Should this resume actually create a task schedule to download additional things at 2 in the morning? The answer is no. It should just be showing you a resume, right? So there's a multitude of tools, I guess, that we would correlate together to help build a picture of you and how you would interact with the system and how the applications are supposed to work and things like that.
Oh my gosh. So I can definitely see this being an issue for a nonprofit organization that may not have that type of infrastructure in place, or even someone kind of monitoring. I can't tell you how many organizations where the CFO is also wearing the IT hat, and that seems to be an area where it's a concern. So Jay, I thought when you showed me this visual, I was a little nervous, but can you just explain what we're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we like to do is, it's very impactful, right? You want to see the actual live threat maps that are going on. You can see the address on the bar right there. It's live threat map is for Radware. Radware is one of them. There's also Checkpoint has their own. There's a multitude of organizations that have this. What they do is they have sensors throughout various organizations across the world. Those sensors get to see if an attack's coming at them, what type of attack it is, where it's coming from, where it's originating, so it gives you a lot of good information and a visual way to consume it too. So while you hear that there's a lot of attacks on a daily basis, this can actually show you some of them, throughout a given snapshot of time, an hour, 10 minutes, 5 hours, whatever it is. And if you look at this was just taken a few minutes ago, so we had a more accurate picture. Today's top attackers is the United States. We're attacking, as far as these sensors are gathering, more than any other country, and we're also being attacked more, than any other country at this point too, at least through this measurement tool. So yeah, it's if you get a chance to, not during this webinar, but certainly after, open it up, take a look at this. You'll see a lot of information. If you don't think that we're in a cyber war, I think you may see that your opinion may change after start looking at these.
I think there's always this concern that whatever the intelligence is out there, why would they be looking at my information? But obviously there's a lot of information that we have that we probably don't know is valuable to others. So one of the questions that we got from the webinar registration was, what resources are available to keep up with the changing landscape of regulations in cybersecurity?
Yeah, great question. So for board members themselves, right, if we're just going to take the board and the C-level for organization, I would, personally, I would go out and seek a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, a Chief Security Officer, an Information Security Officer, somebody like that with that expertise, that certification, so that way they can help lend their advice and expertise to the board on an ongoing basis, right? The attacks change, the board landscape may change. You want somebody to take all that technical jargon and be able to translate it for each one of the board members so they fully understand the risks available to the organization. You also want that for the C-level, and even to the employees. So that's one resource I highly recommend, appoint a CISO or that level of person to a board that you can engage with on a regular basis. Other areas too, partner with a technology provider that focuses in cybersecurity, right? The technology provider will give you boots on the ground information as far as what your local area or what your vertical or what your country is experiencing to help you very quickly protect your network and your systems and your information against some of those threats, right? So that technology partnership with the CISO is great, with the technology provider also that has that interest within your organization to make sure you're successful is certainly a good partnering strategy. CISA, if you're familiar with it, is Homeland Security. It's a division of Homeland Security that was founded a few years ago. They focus on cybersecurity. CISA provides a lot of information on an ongoing basis. They provide cybersecurity alerts and advisories. They also give you a set of tools, called their CSET, where you can actually take assessments of the organization. Say if you're in healthcare, providing nonprofit services to healthcare, you can take a HIPAA-related questionnaire, right? And they'll give you, the areas of focus that you're good in and areas that you should also focus on improving too. That's just one example. We have a lot of different examples there. But even so, like even more hyper locally, you have different states across the United States have a joint cyber task force, right? In Rhode Island, we have the Rhode Island State Police that's part of it. And the Joint Cyber Task Force feeds information to many other organizations, including FBI and Homeland Security, but also other state police as well. I would highly recommend going to your local Joint Cyber Task Force, the JCTF, or whatever the equivalent is in your state, signing up for the alerts, become a member if you can, become an active member in that community. So that's what I would certainly recommend as focus areas for any organization.
So I was thinking I'm going to sign up for those, but is the language that's coming out of those something that a layman or woman can understand, or is that going to require someone to kind of do some technical translation? I mean, again, you mentioned having a CISO, and I don't know how common those roles are on a board, or if I think in that role, you want to make sure that the person is really engaged. So hiring someone is probably in the best interest versus expecting someone to take on that role on a volunteer basis. But how is that language? Is that language fairly user-friendly, or is it something that you still may want to have a CISO or a technology partner work with you on understanding?
Great. So the CISA, which is Homeland Security, and your Joint Cyber Task Force, those information sets are highly technical. I would send that information to a tech department, a technical lead, somebody in charge of security. As far as the board, or somebody thereof, I would say a technology partner that can translate, the technical jargon to what the impact would be on the organization is certainly a great place to start, because most organizations will have technology partner, a managed service provider, something thereof. Make sure they do have a focus in cybersecurity. CISO is by far, I think, the most knowledgeable in the area and can speak at that, level. A certified, CISO can speak at that level. CISOs have been around for quite a while. It's more of a new term. You see a lot of insurance questionnaires actually asking for, do you have a CISO within the organization? Do you have a person appointed for it? So you see a lot of drive to engage somebody at that level. Also to within a written security information plan, information security plan, you're gonna have somebody that's appointed as a CISO or a chief security officer or an information security officer. So you should have one of those in place, because that also is driving the need for that position. Just make sure that that person is available both to the board and to the organization.
Lots of information. So, one of the major things we want to make sure that we understand is the impact on nonprofits. Obviously, there's the day-to-day functionality of their systems. Obviously, if ransomware comes into play and they can't run their programs, that's a major issue. But if an organization gets attacked and then there's something on the news, the impact on their reputations, I think the slide that you had, the first quote on this, the first slide's quote talked about takes years to build a reputation and seconds to potentially tarnish it. And that's, some of the challenges that we wanted to make sure that we can help organizations address before it happens, more the proactive versus the reactive approach. But here are some of the issues that we've seen impact nonprofits: loss of revenue. Obviously, we just mentioned the brand reputation, loss of funding. We know that most organizations, a lot of organizations rely on governmental funding. This could, obviously impact that, but also other private funding. You've put me at risk personally with my donor information. Now, why would I continue to support you? Obviously, supporting your employees if you have a loss of funding or, those types of things are going to be issues. So these are all different aspects that we wanted to include. Jay, do you want to explain the last two? Because those are probably a little bit more technical for the folks, at least for me personally.
So think of an attack as a ransomware attack, right? We're just going to use that. There's many other types of attacks, but we'll focus on that because that's more prevalent these days. A ransomware attack happens when you have either somebody inside the network, an insider threat, that launches the attack and can potentially make a percentage of a profit that from giving that access to the threat actor group, or it could happen for a variety of reasons, right? So once you have a threat actor group within your system, in the past, we'll say 4 or 5 years ago, they used to get into schools, they used to get in governments, and they would launch a ransomware attack and they would be interrupted, right? So they would take down a network for a day, a couple days, a week, couple weeks. you know, and they would be very impactful in that way. But that's all they try to do is lock up your data, right? And impede your operations on a daily basis. What they found out was that, you know, people are starting to recover from backups a lot more efficiently and focusing on those areas. So they weren't getting paid more and more. Initially, they were getting paid a lot because they were the organizations they were going after. But we started getting a little bit better, you know, as in the nonprofit space with our backups and our testing it. So their payments went down and down and down and down. So, you know, how do they keep extorting more money with the tools that they have? So once they get access into the network, they decided to start very slowly taking data out of the network, right? So now they would go through your system because they already have access to your system. They had to launch the ransomware attack from there, right? So they slowly exfiltrate or take data out of your network and they store it on their system, right? Now that data itself, while they can be impactful and lock up your network and your current store from backup, they hold that data hostage, right? That data can have social security numbers, it can have mortgage information, it can have all sorts of very sensitive information on people, right? It can, in the nonprofit space, you can have donor information. You have information on the donors' families and birthdays and, you know, the amount of money that they're giving in a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. You get a lot of information that's very sensitive to a lot of high value targets. So if you decide not to pay the ransomware attack because you restored your network, well, that data is even more valuable. So they can take it and they can sell it, they can hold it for hostage, they can force you, even though you've restored your network, they can force you to pay so that way they don't release that very sensitive information into the wild. Like Los Angeles School District, think of them. They decided not to engage the threat actor, they decided not to pay, and anybody can go to the threat actor's website and gather information on, you know, 100,000 plus, actually I think it's 600,000 plus students at this point. So double extortion, yeah, is not just the impactful event, but also holding the data, the ransom. OFAC sanction list is, I believe it's the Office of Foreign Asset Control. It's the United States, portion of the United States government. An OFAC sanction list is a list of terrorist organization, cartels, rogue nation states, things like that, where if you decide that you want to pay a ransomware threat group to make sure that you know, can decrypt your network or whatever, but you also don't have them release your very sensitive data into the wild, you have to ensure that your users, that the organization, the threat actor group, is not on that OFAC sanction list, because if you get caught paying a fine, if you get caught sending Bitcoin to somebody that's considered a terrorist organization, because that terrorist organization is the one that launched the ransomware attack or cracked into your network or anything like that, if you're caught paying them, you can land yourself in a world of trouble, you know, especially with the U.S. government and other organizations as well. In the past, it was frowned upon very highly for the OFAC sanction list to pay any organization that's listed on it. It's kind of back and forth right now. I think this administration says you shouldn't do it, but we understand if you do, why you had to do it. But still, I mean, funding terrorism is not something I think any of us want to be in, especially if you're funding terrorism with donor funds, right? So that can be very impactful.
So when you're getting it, so say an organization gets into a situation where they want to basically relinquish back their information by paying this threat actor, is the CISO, who is going to help them determine if they are on this list and how they can protect themselves? Is that going to be the CISO, or is that going to be someone in law enforcement? How does that go? How does that happen?
Yeah, so it should be part of an incident response plan, right? It may be the CISO, but hopefully it's not. So when you have a threat actor group or an organization that cracks into your business, right? You're going to contact your insurance company. You're going to contact a threat response team. You're going to have a fusion team. Fusion team will have a mixture of talented resources. You know, we'll have a forensic team. You'll have ransomware negotiators or threat actor negotiators. You should never ever engage the threat actors directly yourselves. You don't have the tools, and you could be putting yourself more at risk for doing that. There's a lot of great companies that we've worked with that have pulled us into attacks after they've happened and said, hey, we want you to do the remediation. We're going to handle the negotiation. So you would have the CISO really in the internal portion of the organization pulling the strings, but you would also externally have a breach coach, an entire Fusion team that would help you react to the event and how to navigate through it. So it's big business, right?
It sounds so scary and time consuming for an organization. And now you're supposed to be doing, managing this threat and then managing the day-to-day and kind of keeping all the balls in the air with all these crazy things that are potential.
Yeah.
Crazy.
One more thing on the lawsuits too. So lawsuits themselves are not necessarily just lawsuits against the organization. We've seen lawsuits go back as early as 1996 against the board of directors, right? I think the Caremark decision in 96 determined that the directors can be held personally liable for failing to appropriately monitor and supervise the enterprise. We're not talking, can you pierce the D&O policy? I mean, that's really depends on the event. But board of directors can personally be held liable, and I think that's very impactful. And just on that, one last point on it, I was a member of 4 different boards earlier this year, or different committees within the boards. I stepped away from one of them. After I became a member, I was voted in. I started performing my due diligence. I found that the organization may put me personally at risk, and I sent my resignation. I stepped away. I'll still help them from afar, but to be an active member of that board, the personal liability is huge. So I had to make sure that I assessed the organization properly.
So I think, Jay, that kind of leads to a little bit of this question, but so what can we do to safeguard? What is some low-hanging fruit? Because you obviously have the expertise. I know there's a couple of questions on a few slides later on in the presentation that kind of discuss what board members need to ask, but like, what made you jump off that board? Obviously, we don't want you to disclose information, but what led you to say they're not acting in the best interest of the organization? I can't continue with this organization.
Yeah, there was a lot of technical debt, we'll call it, right? A lot of very intelligent people on the board, amazing talent on the board in different areas. The communication through the board itself was being held through personal emails, so communication was being at risk, right? There was potential legal issues from the past that had started jumping up again. There was issues with compliance. There was a lot of potential exposure for that organization. I made recommendations itself to the organization throughout the course of about a month and a half. And the organization said, "This is great, thank you for the information," and didn't move on any of it. So at that point, bringing that information to the board, bringing that information to the organization, say, here's a risk, here's a risk, here's a risk. We need to solve it in these ways. I'll happily volunteer my time to do it for free to do it. And the organization didn't have, I think, the backing at the board level to put those things in place. So, at that point, that was my decision to step away from it. I just wanted to remove my personal risk from it too.
Wow. So what is one of the major things, so what's a really easy thing an organization can do to protect themselves? Like you mentioned lots of questions regarding in an insurance questionnaire. Is there something that insurance is going to want to see in every organization before they will even insure you?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, insurance was very easy to get. I think it was added to the property causality. You get free cyber insurance, right? And then 2019 happened, and 2020 happened, and a lot of ransomware attacks happened, and a lot of payments happened. So insurers started putting together these really encompassing questionnaires. At a minimum, they want to see that an organization has multi-factor authentication, right? Be careful how you answer it, though, right? Does the organization have multi-factor authentication across all of their platforms, or just in one area? Because it matters, right? So if you have that question with an insurance questionnaire, you want to make sure that you're in communication with your insurer and say, are you asking for our network? Or you're asking across all providers? Because that matters. If you have an impactful event that came in from a provider or impacted a provider, that path could matter, and the insurer may decide not to pay the claim. It could be all out of pocket at that point, right? So some low-hanging fruit, certainly review the insurance questionnaire and the organization's answers to it. Seek expert help, right? Find somebody that can translate the technical information to consumable format for the board, to non-technical people, right? I think that's a lot of times you'll find volunteers within organizations that's certainly able to help and willing to help, because if I'm a donor for a nonprofit and I'm giving tens of thousands or millions of dollars, I want to make sure that you're protecting me and my family too, so I can continue to have this relationship with the organization. So how can I help you, right? A lot of time I'll have resources that I can certainly. I think all organizations should be on a path towards zero trust. Multi-factor is certainly a portion of it, but there's a lot of other metrics in there. Zero trust is also being driven largely by the federal government. And so right now, the United States federal government is the largest single employer globally, right? The federal government, the entirety of it has to be zero trust framework by the end of FY24, which is June 30th, this upcoming June 30th. The entire United States federal government can move into that model. There's really very little that should be stopping the rest of the organizations from doing that too, because we expect flow down funding from the federal level to have certain requirements in the near future saying that, we've moved the entirety of the federal government in there, you should be there also. You should have a path towards that, right? So that's something they should be planning and considering.
But I think that's definitely a concern, because we have a lot of organizations that receive federal or federal to state pass-through funding from the federal government. So those requirements are likely going to come down the pike very soon. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of funding available to get organizations, up to speed. You had mentioned provider, and I think provider in different sectors means something different. So provider in a healthcare setting could be a doctor or a doctor's office or something like that, versus a provider in others. Is that more a vendor or someone outside or a cloud service? What does provider mean with respect to what you were saying earlier?
Yeah, thanks for the clarifying question. So managed service provider, managed service security provider. So in the technical space, you have an MSP or an MSSP. That's who you'd want to consider as far as my conversation, as far as the provider portion of it. So to your point, it's not on the provider and the medical, it's a managed service provider, technical provider.
Okay, thank you. So we did get a question coming through, and I wanted to mention it because it was always something that I always thought. So how can you be really sure that the ransomware perpetrator is going to actually return the information? Like, why would you pay if you can't get any type of confirmation that you actually got your information back and there's no longer a threat?
Yeah, you can't. So that's the easiest and simplest answer. You can't. There's supposed to be honor among thieves, and they try to adhere to that. But as ransomware groups are infiltrated and disband, some of the threat actors may be arrested and charged with the crime. The rest of them disband and move to other places. Oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes, they'll take that information that was valuable with them. Maybe they didn't, as an insider threat to that ransomware organization, they may have felt that they didn't get funded properly and they want to have another extortion, against that data and that information. So they can try to sell it on third-party markets as well. They may not necessarily extort the original organization, but that data is still valuable, and you can certainly go and sell it on, the web or dark web. So that's simplest answer is you don't have
no guarantees, basically.
You have a guarantee, you hope, right? And the flip side of it is, if you have a threat actor group that spent a lot of time and money developing their process, and they're large organizations at this point, right? You have development teams, customer service teams, and help desk teams within the threat actor groups themselves launching the ransomware attack. If you find that you are paying them and your information still winds up on the web, they won't be paid anymore, right? There's no incentive for insurers to pay them anymore. So their revenue stream ends, right? So there's the reason that they would want to pay you. But again, there's no guarantee that they would.
Wow, the news just doesn't get any better. So here's some of the key items that Jay and I have put together on some impact on nonprofits, some prevention tips. So as Jay mentioned, using your personal email addresses. I know I've been kind of targeted to be the only board member that gets their email at their professional office. And after talking to Jay, I'm really glad I did, because everybody has their personal Gmail, or I have iCloud email, and I'm glad I don't use that, because after talking to Jay, I would have put myself at risk, and I don't want to do that. But there's also a lot of great platforms. Jay included Onboard. I know I've seen organizations use Google Drive. Jay, can you give us your take on Google Drive?
I think it's a risk. So Google, very much like Microsoft, has an enterprise version where it can have zero trust. Zero trust means just because just because, let me actually step back. Zero trust is it's a method of tracking and revoking access to all of your data, right? In a very simple way, right? It knows who you are, the data that you touch, the systems that you use, and things like that, and it wraps it all into a nice little package. Google has an enterprise version of it that you can wrap into a zero trust model, and at that point, you can feel relatively certain if you are in that zero trust model that your information can be secured properly. Most organizations are just storing it in the free Google Drive. Google Drive is it's a tool that you can help the organization communicate through, but it's not a tool to secure information also, right? So make sure if you're going to be using Google Drive, use the zero trust version of it or implement that framework over it. But yeah, I would steer away from Dropbox. I would steer away from Box. I would stay away from Google Drive. I would focus onto the tools that most nonprofits already have, which is Microsoft 365. You get a ton of free licensing with 365. You have many of the tools that you need to secure the information within that platform. Put the efforts in there, or on a board platform like Onboard or Board Effect, or keep the communications in that.
I've seen a lot of organizations also add their board members to their emails. So sross at the board extension. Is that another way to kind of also protect the organization? Or is that kind of, is that a tool that they should consider?
Yeah, and so great question. And I'm not an attorney, so don't take this as legal advice. If you use your personal Gmail or your personal AOL account, you may be opening yourself up to discovery if an event happens, right? So any way that you can use a board platform or leverage the tools within an organization, I would certainly go that route first. I would keep my personal life separate from my, my activities on a board or within the nonprofit itself. Don't commingle, right?
Kind of going on these other items, I think we've chatted about them throughout the webinar, but having access to an expert, I think, is a key one. You don't necessarily want to be penny wise and dollar foolish when it comes to the organization and protecting it from cybersecurity, even if it's just to kind of, how often, obviously it sounds like this is something that's constantly evolving, but realistically, if an organization doesn't have a lot of resources, can they rely on a CISO maybe quarterly, annually? How often should they be engaging a CISO to kind of help them with their cybersecurity decisions?
Yeah, I recommend a CISO where possible, right? And it's not possible everywhere. So seek the technical expertise that you can within the limitations you have for an organization. A lot of managed service providers will give you quarterly business reviews as part of their offering, right? So make sure as part of that conversation, it's not just the IT team taking part in the quarterly business review. You have the executive leadership of the organization should be taking part of it as well. Understand the technical landscape, but bring those cyber questions in there. Are we compliant? Are we 201 CMR 17 compliant en masse? Are we GDPR compliant? Show it to me, prove to me that we are. Show me the technology we have in place to put me at ease. Board members are certainly more than welcome to take part in those conversations too, because ultimately they're responsible for the organization. So if you don't have the ability to engage a CISO, which again, a lot of organizations don't, rely on the technical teams you have at your disposal, whether you're paying for them or not, and go down the routes of the quarterly business review, adding that, to the conversation.
Thank you. All right, so the legal and regulatory, which you mentioned CMR, is it 17?
201 CMR 17, yeah, it's a massive privacy law. Yeah.
I know the IRS regs, you know the tech regs. So yeah. Together we can kind of walk through this. So here's some things. The one thing that I know we've been asking all of our clients for is the written information security plan. I think one of the things that was really eye-opening to me was you can have insurance, you can have all of those things, but once you have a breach, they're going to ask for your written information security plan. And if one doesn't exist, what happens, Jay?
You get fined. Yeah, very, very big fines. Yeah, very big fines. I mean, the game plan to go by too, as far as breach response. So.
Yeah, I think, the written information security plan isn't specifically to digital. It's any type of information that an organization has. And I think there are templates out there, but if you don't update the template, you don't monitor it, you don't test it, you don't do all of those things, it really is kind of having a conflict of interest policy that doesn't get reviewed or even executed. So it's not just having one in place, it's making sure that it's working. So one of the things too that I think is there's oversight, not much oversight over, is we talk about and we list on the PowerPoint what are the exposure areas. So obviously our employees, our board members, but I think the ones that kind of surprised me, or the ones that weren't top of mind, were our volunteers. What are some of the other issues that could arise? You know, obviously we have customers and donors here, but the states that organizations operate in, is it just the ones that people live in, or is it, I know we had talked about this and you had mentioned there's a lot more than meets the eye with these types of regulations and what you need to incorporate. Can you kind of touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot to unpack in this one, right? So we've got the legal and regulatory requirements you need in many states to have a written information security plan or an equivalent, you know, and it's required by law. You have a business, you have to have this in place. If you don't have one, find one, you know, build one, you know, seek help, you know, you need to get this in place. It's a requirement. And the written information security plan deals with different areas. It deals with data classification, deals with access control, you know, multi-factor authentication, deals with encryption. Are you required to have encryption because you have HIPAA information, because you have PCI information, you're accepting credit cards? Do you have to have, you know, do you have to adhere to Massachusetts 201 CMR 17, Mass Data Privacy Law, right? It talks about, you know, backup and recovery, security awareness training, a lot of the different areas, right? As far as once that WISP is in place, now you need technology to be able to track the information that you have, secure the information you have, and revoke access to it. And to your point right here, Massachusetts 201 CMR 17 is a mass data privacy law that affects most organizations, not just in Massachusetts, most in New England. The reason is if you store information on a Massachusetts resident within your system, you know, then you fall under that law. So say if you're a Connecticut corporation or a Maine corporation and you generally have work, your employees work generally in that state, but you keep their information for 7 years, 10 years. And at some point throughout that time, that employee or that student or that person or that donor or that vendor or anybody that you have that information on moves to Massachusetts and you still have it in your system, you now have to adhere to that law, right? There's a couple of nuances to it. But in general, that at a high level is the way to consider it.
So we got a great question in the chat. Who regulates the WISP?
It depends on the state you live in, right? So Rhode Island has Rhode Island Identity Theft Protection Act. Massachusetts specifically calls out for a WISP. So whatever state you're incorporated in, find out the WISP equivalent that is required by that state to make sure that you have it and that you're in compliance with it. And don't just build it once, build it, review it, you know, on at least a yearly basis, note the changes, and then, you know, handle the deficiencies within the WISP as well.
So is it really the board's responsibility to make sure management has put this in place and to ensure that it's, you know, there's oversight over the policy?
Yes, yeah, and I believe it's what is the board's fiduciary duty is to ensure that the organization is in compliance with the laws and the regulation that the organization has to adhere to, right? So that is the board's duty, right?
Yeah, the one thing I think that has been a major issue is we have, I know KLR does, I know many of our clients do have remote employees, and you lose sight because sometimes those remote employees move and you only find out when they, you know, they need to make a change of address to their W-2 and they change states. So now you have another state to ensure you're in compliance with. So really understanding what the exposure is by looking at where your donors are from, looking at where your vendors are from, you know, making sure that your addresses are up to date. That's a huge piece of making sure that that WISP is going to incorporate all of the applicable laws and regulations. I know the CMR,
I know 1 CMR 17. Yeah.
When I mentioned that to some of our Rhode Island clients, we're like, I'm not in Rhode Island. Well, yeah, you live in Massachusetts, you're an employee, so it's absolutely applicable. So really just opening your eyes to what the exposure is an extremely important role for the board and for management and everyone kind of involved with the organization.
If the SEC Commissioner Louis Aguilar had a great quote, and it said, board directors are responsible for overseeing the management of all kinds of risks. So there's little doubt that cyber risk is also a form of the board's oversight. So it's not just that compliance and regulatory, it's cyber as well.
Yeah, I mean, as a board member, I may not know what to do in these situations, but I know enough to raise my hand to say, we need help and we need to make sure we get the right people to help us. And I think that all people need to be really comfortable in understanding that that's part of their role. And if they can't come forward with the assistance and the help and the expertise, they really need to get the people on board to really help them. So here's kind of related to what we were just talking about. How do I, as a board member, protect myself when I'm required to give personal sensitive information to outside parties?
Yeah, so I think there's two different ways to look at it, and I'll touch on the one from my point of view, right? So my data, I actually found on the dark web. I went to Clop Leaks, and it's probably still there. I applied for a mortgage years ago, and it was taken from the Acelion breach, and I found my data on the dark web. It includes my driver's licenses and bank accounts and everything you need to apply for a mortgage. It's sitting there. So from my personal point of view, I think everybody needs to have zero trust wrapped around their life, which gives you the ability to share documents, track the documents, and revoke access to the documents no matter where it is, right? So if I share a document with you, Sandy, I give you access to it, only you have access to it. It's encrypted. Nobody else can do it unless I share it to somebody else. So where possible, do that, but I understand it's a very technical feature and it's not for everybody, right? So that's for me. As far as for non-technical people, there are things called due diligence questionnaires, right? Due diligence questionnaire is something that's becoming more and more prevalent within the industry. And there are templates that you can get, templates and frameworks that you can get, and you can certainly send out, and you can make sure that you understand the risk for your information, right? And the due diligence questionnaire has things in there like, has the organization had a breach? You know, when was their last penetration test? What were the results? So they won't necessarily give you in-depth in the weeds, but you know that they're doing their best to ensure that your information that they have, they're protecting it, right? So I think that's one area. Zero trust, I think zero trust, zero trust, zero trust. Ask the question, does your organization employ a zero trust framework? And that means, can you track, revoke access to the data? You know, that to me is really just, it's a foundational element that all businesses need to have, you know, in this day and age.
So I went too quickly over the, so here are some of the questions that we're going to include in the slide deck that's going to go out to the group. I want to make sure that we get through all of these slides. I know we've covered some of these questions in what we've discussed so far, so you'll see all of these questions when it comes to you after the presentation. This is a question that came through several times. What kinds of insurance should an organization have to protect themselves against cybersecurity threats?
Sure. So I think that's a very difficult question to answer at this day and time, right? And the reason is because you have to understand the organization, the amount that it's generating, you know, potential loss. You have to understand the landscape that you're going in. You have to, beyond that, know the technology safeguards you've put in place. And then you can certainly ask for coverage. And I see more organizations now being denied coverage than any other type of organization. Nonprofits are falling victim to this probably higher than any other vertical because nonprofits are trying to put as much in funding towards their mission as possible. So technical debt does happen just as a matter of fact, right? So make sure if you're going for insurance coverage, you bring two partners in there with you. So you're the organization, you're the nonprofit. Engage KLR, I'm Sandy and the team. They do a phenomenal job when it comes to certain areas of it. Engage a technical party as well, so that way we can answer both sides, because you're going to have to answer very technical information. You're going to have to answer, you know, very broad information as far as the organization and structure and whatnot to actually figure out what you even qualify for. I would say the average cyber liability policy I'm seeing now is only $1 million, and that doesn't cover a breach. You know, so that would cover portions of a breach, but you know, it doesn't necessarily cover the entirety of a breach. Average breaches are in the several millions at this point. Can you get a $5 million policy? Absolutely. What's your security look like? You know, so that's a big question. And how much are you willing to pay to have that policy on a year-by-year basis?
I know, Jay, you've done some work at our clients and helping them determine what their process is, and I think that kind of leads us into the next question about where do I learn about opportunities to apply for technology grants? And you had mentioned there's some work that needs to be done in order for you even to be eligible for these grants. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So To answer this direct question, I would say an easy way, if you want to take it in-house and do it, you can look at grants.gov. They got a lot of information. Beyond that, though, what I would highly suggest doing is partnering with an organization, a tech company, a kind of company that tracks them. What we do is we take the initiatives that the organization has, and it's not just cybersecurity. It could be you need a new wireless network. You've got some technical debt that need new computers, right? Partner with an organization, a technology company that tracks them, understands all the different things that you would like to have throughout the next year, 3 or 5 years as part of your plan. And it could be you want a safer, secure system. You want a new website design. You want that's ADA compliant, right? Because we all need that now, which is good. We also, have different things that you want to go after. Take those initiatives with a provider, line them up, and then find out, that provider, like us, we should be able to tell you what grants are out there. There are, to your point, many times that you'll have to do some background work, right? So if you want to do some cybersecurity funding through the NSGP, NSGP is one, it's a nonprofit security grant program that came out the 2023 version's already closed, came out a few years ago. There's a lot of funding in there to help pay for the cybersecurity measures, but there's other ones too, like the Massachusetts just had a EOHHS just released, I think, $12 million in September for organizations that had technical debt, like they needed laptops or servers or things like that, right? So partner with an organization, find out the grants you want to go for that would cover the technology initiatives you have, and then you're gonna, with that technology partner, do the background work. For the NSGP, they want to see that you have driving factors. You've done an assessment of your organization. You can help. You can take that information that your technology partner is giving to you and help augment the information required in the grant to help drive the funding to your organization.
So when you say technical debt, I think is it like information security deferred maintenance? Like have a team of people using 10-year-old laptops, and we have old phones that aren't, getting updated for security updates. Is it technical debt, that type of stuff?
All of it, yeah. So if you know that you wanted to put in new wireless access points because the ones that you have are several years old, or if you have laptops that are 8, 9, 10 years old, or if you need to become compliant with, MAS's 201 CMR 17, you just haven't had the funds to put towards it. That's all technical debt. That's debt that you have to pay at some point. It's just accrued over time, So so the grants, like EOHHS, REMA, Rhode Island Emergency Management has them. Rhode Island Department of Education has them. Technology and furniture funds that were just available. The NSGP, SLCGP. There's a lot of funds out there, a lot of grants out there that you would want to partner with and bring your best foot forward with a couple of organizations like us and KLR, to make sure that you're in the best possible position to get these.
I think the one thing that I found, Jay, you are an amazing resource of information because you've done this for so many years. And I think right off the top of your head, you answer the question so seamlessly, but you also give me a lot of assurance that I get the answers and I can be confident that, okay, he's doing his homework so that I know what to go back to my board to do and my clients. So I appreciate all of the work that you've done to kind of stay on top of this stuff. So we've been talking about so many different things. What are the key takeaways that you should take away to your organizations to stay safe? What are the, obviously we can all read the screen, but what are the biggest cyber concerns going forward? Thoughts on bad guys and AI. This one is really scary.
Yeah, so I'll give you that one and then I'll give you the takeaways. So AI has been leveraged very heavily for years, right? Threat actors have been using AI for years. It was called machine learning. Now we use generative AI. The tools have evolved, over time, certainly, but threat actors are generally technically savvy people that already have access to it, that can write what is needed. The difference between what that landscape has had in the past and what it's doing now is these tools are now available to the masses, right? I can, feed, I as a disgruntled worker, I'm not, but should I be a disgruntled worker, can feed information into, a large language model like ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, here's a letter from this board of directors or my CEO. I want you to craft an email in their language style, in their writing style, and I want to, have XYZ, and it can take what they've done and how they speak and how they write, including, the way that they may do typos, and then craft information that you can use in a phishing attack or targeted attacks against organizations. Those tools are readily available for everybody. But beyond that, there's a lot of non-technical people out there that say, I just want to, I don't know, scan my network and I just want to take it out. I want to write something really, really just bad and try to break my network because I'm just angry and walk out the door. Hopefully nobody does that, but you can use ChatGPT for that or some large language models. You have to ask it and prompt it. You have to do some prompt engineering, they call it, in the proper way. But anybody these days can become a coder, right? So that makes it a bit more dangerous, especially with AI. But my biggest concern with AI is sentience, right? When AI becomes aware of itself, and then can decide what's best for us without our input, that's what makes me a little bit more nervous. So that's mine.
I don't even want to think about that. It sounds like a sci-fi kind of movie.
Very close to it too, and it's years away, not decades away.
Oh boy.
As far as the takeaways for board members, know the organization's compliance obligations and the associated regulations, right? Understand the laws that you and that the organization have to adhere to. You can see a lot of the stuff right on the screen. I would say make sure that you don't underfund cybersecurity. Find grant funds, make sure a portion of the budget is allocated to your cyber initiatives. Review the kind of data that your organization is collecting and ensure that it is encrypted. It adheres to the compliance obligations that you have to, adhere to. But you can also prove that it is, and then you can track the data should it get out into the dark web, onto the USB. Prove that you can actually reach into those systems and then delete the data. The tools are there. Most organizations have the tools. Just overlay the proper framework, it gives you the abilities, right? So make sure that you have that in place. The little hanging fruit, get a WISP, and then due diligence questionnaires are certainly great to have. If you have policies, follow them, review them, adhere to them, find the gaps in it, and then address the gaps, because if you don't, having the policy and not adhering to it is frowned upon, we'll say, right? It could open up additional risk. And then make sure you understand what the limitations are on the insurance that you have. What you don't want to be is an organization that finds out after an attack that you didn't have insurance at all, or you did have insurance, but it has these requirements and you didn't meet, half of them. So now you're paying $1 million or $3 million out of pocket. Can you do that, right? As a nonprofit.
One question that comes to mind with the insurance specifically and the WISP, should the CISO assist with writing the WISP, get it reviewed by an attorney, or should the attorney be involved in reviewing the WISP as well?
100%. Yep, absolutely. CISO should be, guiding the technical abilities of the organization, putting in the proper safeguards, and working on defining the WISP and revising it. Always seek legal counsel, So I'm not an attorney. Great set of people. I don't speak their language and they don't speak mine when it comes to the technical side. So partner with an attorney, make sure that they're on board with the language that you're putting in, make sure the organization is also following it. You set up steering committees, make sure that the organization is doing what they need to do, to be successful, to protect everybody, donors and board members and employees all alike.
If all of the energy that goes into, doing these hacks went into, the nonprofit sector, can you imagine what we could do it's just such a waste of energy that these people are putting into, making these horrible things happen for these organizations. I wish we didn't have to worry about these things, but unfortunately, we have to make sure that we're proactive. I think that's the one thing that, if you take anything away, is to be proactive about having these conversations, to make sure that your organization is prepared and not taken by surprise by these types of issues that can come up without even really planning for them. So thank you, Jay. I think you've been an amazing wealth of knowledge today. As you can see on the screen, we have a lot of affiliate companies. Both Jay and I are so willing to help your organization. I can help on the assessment side and helping those types of things. Jay is definitely your expert in helping you find grant funding, doing assessments to determine what the needs are, determining if you have technical debt. We know there's a lot of organizations that put off those types of expenditure. So thank you very much. We've enjoyed presenting today. We hope that you had been able to take away some good information from today.
Thanks, Sandy. I appreciate your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandy and Jay. And as a reminder, we will be sending out a copy of the slides and a recording of today's presentation after the webinar. Hope everyone has a great day. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Ashley.
Bye-bye.